The max attack for level 4 monsters is 2000 before they start having negative effects for having higher attack. So in this list, we'll just be going over those kinds of monsters that have more than 2000 attack. And at number 10, we have Zombra the Dark. This is a level 4 monster with 2100 attack, which has the effect where it can't attack directly, and if it destroys a monster by battle, it loses 200 attack permanently. This card actually saw a lot of play in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Since it was a level 4 monster with more than 1900 attack. So it could beat over any of the 1900 attack beatsticks which dominated early Yu-Gi-Oh! And it could do it twice. After it attacked one monster, its effect would bring its attack down to 1900, which means it could then trade evenly with another 1900 attack monster before finally hitting the graveyard. It could also go toe-to-toe with Cyber Dragon, so it was just the perfect amount of attack in order to play with the meta without having a detrimental effect like Goblin Attack Force, which would put into defense position after attacking once. Zombra the Dark was also Dark Attribute, which meant it comboed even better with Strike Ninja and Dark Arm Dragon decks. Strike Ninja decks would banish dark monsters from the graveyard in order to bring them all back with return from the different dimension. And Dark Arm Dragon would use dark monsters in the graveyard in order to destroy all of your opponent's cards. And both of them like to have dark monsters in the graveyard to do their effects. So Zombra the Dark was usually played alongside them, or sometimes just in the side deck as an option to go into if you needed to beat over your opponent's 1900 attack beatsticks, or Cyber Dragon, as Cyber Dragon was a format-defining card at this early point of Yu-Gi-Oh! So anything that could help counter it was a big deal. Zombra the Dark is kind of the king of old-school Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters with more than 2000 attack while being level 4 or lower. All other cards in this list are going to be more modern, and half of them are extra deck monsters. And at number 9, we have Underworld Fighter Balmung. This is a level 4 synchro monster with 2100 attack that has completely generic materials, where if it's destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can then special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard except this card. This card saw a lot of competitive play in the past, mainly before 2015, because it was the highest attack level 4 synchro monster you can go into with generic materials, and it had a decent floating effect even if it did only proc off of being destroyed by card effects and not by battle as well. Although at 2100 attack, it was beefy enough to not be attacked over by anything small, but not really strong enough where your opponent would have too much problem beating over it by battle with something else. It was mainly played in competitive Yang Zing and Raccoon decks, as Yang Zings were all about letting their monsters get destroyed by card effects and can go into level 4 synchro monsters pretty easily. Raccoons just specialize in level 2 monsters, including a couple of level 2 tuner monsters, which mean they just kind of played whatever were the best level 4 synchro monsters, and Underworld Fighter Balmung just kind of saw play by default, until 2015. And you'll see why when we get to a higher spot on this list. And at number 8, we have the Fabled Unicore. This is a synchro monster with 2300 attack, so slightly higher than Underworld Fighter Balmung, although it does not have generic materials, as it requires a Fabled Tuner monster as its tuner. And while this card is on the field, if you and your opponent have the same number of cards in your hand, then you can negate all card effects of your opponent, and then destroy those cards, which is not once per turn. So basically, if you and your opponent have the same hand size, you can just negate everything they do. And the Fabled Unicore's effect is kind of a special negate that actually allows you to negate spell speed 4 effects, which could make the Fabled Unicorn spell speed 5 to an extent. As if your opponent activates a card like Super Polymerization and they discard a card, so they have the same amount in both players' hands, then the Fabled Unicorn will actually negate and destroy that card, even though Super Polymerization says that cards and effects cannot be activated in response to its effect. But the reason the Fabled Unicorn gets around this is because its negate is a continuous effect which is always applied, that also has an active component where it negates and then destroys something, which is kind of an exception to the rule and is absolutely a beast if you're able to control your hand with your opponents, by using cards that allow you to discard during your opponent's turn to keep the hand sizes equal. Although this is easier said than done, the Fabled Unicorn did see competitive play, but not a lot of it, as it was only really played in a handful of Raccoon decks, since they can easily go into level 4 synchro monsters and can use the Fabled Cerebrial. And at number 7, we have Old Entity Hastorr. This is a level 4 synchro monster which has 2300 attack, has completely generic materials, and is kind of the go-to level 4 synchro monster if you really want to play a level 4 synchro monster, as it has the effect that if sent from the monster zone to the graveyard, you can equip it to one of your opponent's face-up monsters, where that monster is basically locked down in a similar fashion to Fiendish Chain. However, if this card leaves the field, then you get to take control of your opponent's monster. One of the ways to stop Fiendish Chain is to simply destroy the card on the field so that you can use your monster which was previously locked down. If you try to stop Old Entity Hastorr from locking down a monster, then you instead lose the monster, which means it's usually best to just leave it alone, rather than trying to destroy old Entity Hastorr in the spell and trap card zone. And because Hastorr has higher attack than Underworld fighter Balmung, has a better floating effect, and can proc its floating effect if it's used as a material, it became the go-to level 4 synchro monster once it was released in 2015, and is entirely the reason why Underworld fighter Balmung stopped seeing competitive play, since it just power crept that card by being the new best level 4 generic synchro monster. Although even being the new level 4 generic synchro monster, that's not really a popular level for synchro monsters, so old Entity Hastorr has actually seen less competitive play than every other spot, which would be at a higher spot on this list. And at number 6, we have Scrap Shark. This is a main deck monster at 2100 attack, and has the mandatory effect that if a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated, then this card will destroy itself. And it also has the effect that if this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap card and sent to the graveyard, you can then send one scrap monster from your deck to the graveyard. And since its effect to destroy itself is done by a scrap monster technically, it basically exists to destroy itself in order to mill one card to the graveyard. That way you can set up your graveyard for scrap monsters like Scrap Orthos or Scrap Golem in order to use them later. It's also a great starter card when used in conjunction with Scrap Factory. You can simply normal summon Scrap Shark, then activate Scrap Factory from your hand, which will proc Shark's effect in order to destroy itself, which will also proc Scrap Factory, which has the effect that if a scrap monster is destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon a scrap monster from your deck. So you can just special summon out Scrap Golem in order to start your plays, which is why Scrap Shark is actually pretty good combo starter. It's not the best combo starter in scrap decks, that would probably be Scrap Recycler, but it's definitely an option, and the fact that it has high attack points is kind of irrelevant, because the card is made of glass and destroys itself at the first sign of anything happening. Although, the card only exists in order to destroy itself anyway, so it's actually useful. And at number 5, we have Wulf Lightsworn Beast. This is another main deck monster at 2100 attack, and has the effect where it cannot be normal summoned or set. However, it can special itself from the graveyard if it's sent there directly from the deck. This is kind of the gimmick for a lot of level 4 monsters with high attack. Generally, they have some kind of effect that prevents them from either coming out, like Rare Metal Dragon, or has some kind of negative effect if they're on the field, like how Scrap Shark destroys itself immediately when anything happens. Wulf falls into the category of being hard to bring out, since the card is basically dead if it's in your hand, since you can't use it unless you special summon it from your hand with some other kind of effect. But since it's a Lightsworn monster, it comes out pretty easy because the whole gimmick of the Lightsworn archetype is sending cards from their deck to the graveyard. So it's possible to summon all 3 Wolves from your deck with a single mill of your Lightsworn cards, with something like Charge of the Light Brigade. Lightsworn cards also have cards that allow them to use cards in their hand as a resource, so it's not dead in the hand if it's in your hand, but the card doesn't need to be played for Lightsworns to be successful, since Lightsworns are one of the most long-lasting archetypes in the game, and has kind of consistently seen competitive play ever since they came out, but usually as an engine with other decks that like to put cards in the graveyard. Although, even being used as an engine, Wulf will still show up in competitive decks every now and then, which definitely makes it one of the most played level 4 monsters with more than 2000 attack in the game, and probably one of the most played of these kinds of cards of all time, even if it's not the most played in the modern era. And at number 4, we have Photon Thrasher. This is another main deck monster with 2100 attack, and has the effect where it cannot be normal summoned or set, just like Wulf. However, it can special summon itself from your hand just as long as you control no monsters. And also it can't attack if you control any other monsters. So if you want to attack with this thing, you can bring it out without a normal summon, but then you can't have any other cards, otherwise it's dead on the field. However, this card is a level 4 warrior monster that can special summon itself from the hand, which means it's seen all kinds of competitive play for just being a level 4 warrior that can special summon itself, as the warrior type is incredibly valuable. The fact that it has high attack and restrictions on how it can attack is almost completely irrelevant to how the card is actually played. Usually you just bring it out first when you have an empty field, and then you normal summon your other cards and plays like normal, as its ability is actually incredibly valuable. So Photon Thrasher is just seen playing all kinds of competitive decks, way too numerous to list, like Orcus decks, ABC Dragon Buster, Element Sabers, Lightsworns, Zodiacs, the list goes on and on. Its type, level, and ability to special summon itself from the hand is just incredibly useful. And at number 3, we have Nekroz of Unicore. This is a ritual monster which has the effect where you can discard this card from your hand in order to add a Nekroz card from your graveyard to your hand. And if it's on the field, it has the effect where you just negate the effects of all extra deck monsters. So, with 2300 attack and being part of an archetype which could bring it out super easily, this card was actually kind of overpowered, and was limited on the ban list for a while, only coming off within the last couple of years. The Nekroz have a card called Nekroz Kaleidoscope, which allows you to ritual summon a monster from your hand by using materials from your extra deck, and there's a level 4 synchro monster called Herald of Arclight, where when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a ritual monster or ritual spell card from your deck to your hand. So Nekroz decks were actually able to bring out Nekroz of Unicore, using Herald of Arclight as its full material, in order to search out another card from their archetype in order to continue their plays. Which meant bringing out Nekroz of Unicore resulted in no loss in card advantage. In addition to Nekroz of Unicore just having a really good lockdown effect. So it simultaneously was an excellent card to actually have on the field, and was an excellent card to bring out in the archetype because of the searching it could facilitate. If it wasn't for the top 2 cards seeing a lot more play in recent years, this card was a heavy contender for the number 1 spot on this list. And at number 2, we have Evil Hero Adusted Gold. This is a 2100 attack main deck monster, which has the effect on the field where it can't attack unless you control a fusion monster. So it's one of those high attack level 4 monsters whose restriction is on its attack condition. And seeing as hero decks are all about fusion monsters, if this card hits the field, it's probably going to be able to attack. Not that this card ever comes out in hero decks, because its actual good effect is usable from the hand, where you can discard this card in order to add a card with Dark Fusion in its text from your deck to your hand. Which means you can add Dark Calling, and Dark Calling allows you to use monsters from your hand or graveyard as materials to go into an Evil Hero fusion monster. So the best target to go into is Evil Hero Malicious Bane, who simply requires an Evil Hero plus a level 5 or higher monster as its materials. So Evil Hero Adusted Gold from your graveyard will be the Evil Hero material, and Bane has the effect to destroy all of your opponent's monsters that have an attack less than this card's, and then gains 200 attack for each monster destroyed. In addition to passively being immune to destruction by battle or card effects. And with 3000 attack baseline, it's basically a full monster wipe. So it's a really good card to go into, especially since you can go into it really easily with Evil Hero Adusted Gold, setting up everything for it by itself. Adusted Gold can search out the card, which allows you to use the materials from your graveyard, while also setting itself up in the graveyard, and then you just need a level 5 or higher monster in your hand or graveyard. And seeing as hero decks already play level 5 or higher monsters as just part of their normal deck and engines, Evil Hero Adusted Gold is just one of their best cards, and would see a lot more competitive play if it wasn't so ridiculously expensive in real life, as a single copy of the card can go for over $100. And at number 1, we have Elder Entity Netis. This is a fusion monster with 2500 attack, which requires a Synchro and Xyz monster as its materials, and it needs to be brought out by sending the materials from your side of the field to the graveyard, as you can't use a fusion spell card to bring it out. And when this card is brought out, it has the effect on the field where once per turn you can special summon a level 4 lower monster from your hand. Additionally, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can destroy one card on the field. And the only restriction this card has is that it can only be special summoned once per turn. Now, the reason this card sees so much competitive play is entirely for its floating effect, as it's almost never brought out directly to the field. So the restriction it has is moot. The card's floating effect activates no matter how it's sent to the graveyard, which means if you send this card directly from the deck to the graveyard with something like Extra Foolish Burial, then you get to destroy one of your opponent's cards. Or if you send 3 copies of it to the graveyard with something like Infernoi Tiara, then you get to destroy 3 cards in the field, since its floating effect is not once per turn. And currently there are a couple of cards in the meta which can send monsters from the extra deck to the graveyard in order to use their effects, like the trap card Dogmatica Punishment, which on a Spell Speed 2 effect allows you to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard in order to destroy a monster your opponent controls with an attack less than or equal to it. So, Elder Entity Netis' high attack actually becomes valuable in this scenario, which allows Dogmatica Punishment to destroy any of your opponent's monsters that has 2500 or less attack. Then, after you destroy a card with Dogmatica Punishment, you'll be able to destroy another card with Elder Entity Netis' floating effect, which turns Dogmatica Punishment into a 2-card pop instead of 1. There's also Diviner of the Herald, which allows you to send a fairy monster from your extra deck to the graveyard in order to increase its level by that monster's. Usually it's best to use on Herald of Arclight in order to search out a ritual card, but it can also be used on Elder Entity Netis in order to destroy a card instead, since Netis is also fairy type. And there's also other Dogmatica cards that can send it to the graveyard, like Nadir's Servant or Dogmatica Maximus. And there's also Infernoids who can send to the graveyard if they bring out their boss monster. Basically, there's so many good cards in the meta that send monsters from the extra deck to the graveyard to just use their effects. Elder Entity Netis enjoys a lot of competitive play, easily beating out all the other cards on this list, at least in the modern era. When it comes to cards which have seen the most amount of play overall, it probably has to be either Wulf Lightsworn Beast or Photon Thrasher. Alright, and that's the list. I know this is a pretty specific video, but I like specific videos, and hopefully you learned something new about a card which I probably wouldn't have talked about in a normal list. Anyways, if you have ideas for future videos just like this one, no matter how incredibly specific it is, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, remember to don't not subscribe.